right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about listening and questioning through the recruitment process, and just generally thinking about listening and questioning as a bit of an art form. Okay, so what we're trying to do is we're trying to gain information through the recruitment process, and that's what this is really about. Gathering and obtaining information so that we can use it to make a decision. What that means is we need to make sure that we've got very valid answers and that the questions are right to elicit the correct responses. So there's a few different things we can use to make sure that happens. And the first one is to start to thinking about our techniques. So what we're starting to do is we're starting to think about, well, how can we first of all reassure the candidate who's answering our questions that we are actually listening as we gain information. And we can do things like use of non-verbal cues. Okay, little things like being able to, head nods, agreement, very, very much in body language. Making it clear that we're listening to them, okay? That we're not being distracted, looking at something else, reading other things, or staring off into the room. So maintaining that eye contact, head nods, those sort of things. The other thing to do is we make sure that we actually wait until the questions are answered before we start moving on to the next one. The idea is that we don't want to cut them off. They might be at a culmination point where they're still considering the answer. We don't want to preemptively move, okay? So once you've got that, okay, so that's what you told me, great, and then you can move to the next one. That way it gives them an opportunity to complete their answer and it just stops us losing information. One of the other things we want to do is while we're listening to the conversation, while we're listening to the answer, we're listening for two things. We're listening to the facts, what they're telling us, but we're also starting to listen for emotions. Okay, so that, are we hearing passion in that? Are we hearing a sense of avoidance, nervousness? Okay, so it's not just the words they say, but also starting to think about, well, what's the emotion behind it and whether that was significant to them. Okay, so not necessarily just what they say, but also how they're saying it. Another consideration that we need to think about is interruptions. We need to make sure that we don't interrupt people and that we only go through and interrupt if we sense avoidance. Okay, so if we're not actually getting the answers we want, if they've drifted too far off topic, if they're trying to avoid an answer, then we might interrupt and bring them back onto point. And what we can do is we can also request clarification. So if you get to the end of an answer and you're not entirely sure they've given you the full details you require, feel free to ask them for that little bit more and say, hey, can we go into that a little bit more to explore it? All right, so with some of the things we start to do then is we start to think about, well, how can we put our questions together? And the first thing we need to think about is asking open questions. And what we're talking about when we're doing our open questions, we're starting to use the discussion to initiate a broad, discussion on broad subjects, okay? And what we're trying to do there is get comprehensive explanations. We're trying to avoid yes, no, and start to get into a little bit more detail. So what we need to do is we need to make sure we ask clear, direct phrasing, which is going to ask a single question and establish understanding of the question. So if we ask them the question and then we get an answer back that doesn't make sense, we know pretty well that they didn't understand what we're actually asking. Okay, and the other thing is that the questions are really about how, what, why. Okay, so the sort of things that are going to make them getting into what we want to know. Now, if I ask you, how was your day? How was it? Or what did you like about is a little bit different to did you? Okay, if I ask you, what did you like about dinner last night? Well, I didn't like dinner, and there's a conversation. If I ask you, did you like it? Yes, no. Then you're not going to give me much more information. So if I ask about what, it draws the question out. Now the why one gets a little bit tough because that can often be seen as a bit intimidating, and sometimes it's a bit of an accusation. So why did you do that? It does sound a little bit like a parent in, why were you out till 3 o'clock in the morning? So have a think about that one. Why can be a bit difficult, but the how and what and who was involved and those sort of things which start to elicit some sort of conversation, pretty good. The other option you have there is if you need to get a different type of outcome, you might start to look at closed questions. And when we're talking about closed questions, we want to get a specific reply. Those are really about yes, no, and that's all we're really looking for from a closed question. So it's about statement of fact. Now we try and use those fairly sparingly to avoid looking like once again, it's an interrogation, a little bit like the why. Did you do this? Did you do that? Did you do this? It can start to sound like it's not actually an interview, but an interrogation where, someone keeps asking yes, no, and they feel that, that question might be vague and, there could be a more detailed answer. So we need to think about how we use closed questions and use them sparingly. And what we're trying to do there is we're usually just trying to get clarification or understanding. Okay, so we just need a short answer which clarifies a position. So you're saying this happened? No. Oh, okay, great. Can you tell me what did happen? You're saying this happened? Yes. Okay, great. I now know that happened. So it can be used as a clarification of an open question. We then move to a closed one just to confirm. And the point about a yes-no closed question is that we're trying to be fairly concise or explicit. Okay, so we want to get it nice and short so they can get to a position where they go yes or no, not yes but or no but. Right, so we're starting to go that way. All right, the open question, the advantage about the open question is really that what it does when we're getting back to open here is it puts candidates at ease, all right? It's interesting for the candidate and interviewer because it gives people an opportunity to start having a conversation. Provides depth and detail for further inquiry because while you're going through an open question, if you've given them a sort of an open, open terrain to go and answer their question, and interesting things will come out of it. Okay, they'll take it in all sorts of different ways, and what will happen is you will find a few bits of interest there, which sort of lead you on to further questions later on down the track. Okay, something will come of it, and it's a conversation starter. Okay, it reveals other areas of inquiry, and generally gets, it makes a conversation. If a whole conversation revolves around yes, no, that's not really a conversation at all. But the open questions will allow us to do that. Now, the problem with the open questions, though, is that you can lose control of it very easily, okay? Someone goes to answer a question, they open, an open question, and all of a sudden the answer starts getting bigger and bigger, and eventually you can drift and move off into totally different areas that aren't really the purpose of the interview or aren't really relevant to what you're doing. It can be very time-consuming as well because obviously, the more open the question and the more open the reply, it's going to take time to discuss. Okay, so if you're looking to have a very short interview, open questions are not going to give that to you. It's going to create a massive time requirement. And the other thing is if you appear too open and using too many open questions, it looks like you as an interviewer haven't done your homework. All right, so that's the key part there, particularly if you're asking open questions about stuff that's already in the resume. Sometimes they can get a little bit confused and go, well, hang on, I've already sort of answered that, so why are you inquiring? All right, you've got that detail, so why am I talking about it again? So make sure your open questions are there, they're used appropriately, they're used to sort of talk a little bit more about the person, get a bit of an understanding. You might talk about some of the things in that resume to get the conversation going, but if you don't reference something when you're asking the open questions, then it just looks like you're trying to wing the interview and haven't really prepared for it. The other problem is that it's very hard to then measure if it's really open, and I'm looking at one candidate versus another candidate. With the open questions, because they've got so much open answer, it's really hard to measure this answer against this answer. On the other hand, it can be simple. If I had the closed question, I go, do you have a driver's license? Yes or no? I can now compare candidates very easily. I've got two things, yay, nay. But with these ones, I've got a whole story versus a whole story, and how do I assess? And the other thing is with an open question, the reliability of data is always questioned, all right? So, you're operating off a memory or it's the answer they prepared at the time, which might not necessarily have all the facts, it might not be researched, etc. When we get down to the closed questions, look, the advantage of those is they're very time effective. I can ask a list of questions quickly and get yes, no replies. Okay, so it turns into a very, very fast process. They're very easy to gauge and prepare. Okay, so we know that we want to answer a particular thing. Does someone have a skill or ability or something that's a verifiable fact? Yay, nay, straight away, nice and easy. Okay, so it allows a higher reliability of data because we can actually just put them into a spreadsheet later and just run across because we know it's either a yes or a no, a tick or a cross, red or whatever it happens to be, color-coded, however you want to go. So that gives you reliable data that you can measure candidates against. The good thing about closed questions is you don't have to be a very good interviewer to be able to ask someone a series of closed questions. You can get just about anyone to read that for you. It's a very quick process. And it focuses your candidate on a very direct path, all right? So it keeps them very straight to the point. Okay, so the disadvantage to asking the closed questions, though, is that it can often be a very boring process. Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. The whole interview or the whole conversation just comes down to a series of yes and no, which doesn't really allow much expression and can be a bit monotonous, like it's a test. All right, the other thing is it doesn't, if you've got too many closed questions and you really base things around closed questions, it doesn't give the candidate the opportunity to qualify anything. The yes but or the no but, they can't really have that extra part, the but what, and it could be something very relevant, and might give a bit of a false impression about what's going on. And the other thing is you also don't cover any other areas of interest that the person might have. Because if you're taking them down a very fixed line, then there's nowhere for them to say, well, actually what I really want to do is. Okay, so that's not covered there in the closed questions. All right, so that's open and closed in a nutshell. Another technique we have is the probing question. Okay, and what we're talking about with a probe is that we're trying to hone in on a particular area of interest and then drill down. Okay, so what we're trying to do is get down to detail, get rid of vagueness or ambiguity, and start to get something, a little bit more reliable than maybe the answer they've given us, where things are a little bit light and we want to drill down. Now, the thing about when we start to probe, we need to think that what we don't want to do is getting down to a stage where we're interrogating, but what we're doing is we're getting some of the interest that come out of here. Okay, so, we asked them, what did you like about your last job? There was a lot of, I had a lot of autonomy, I could act by myself. Okay, now we start the probing stuff. We've got some facts there, we want to get down to the bottom of it. Okay, so can you explain how that worked? Take us through how that worked day to day for you. What was it about that particularly that you liked? Okay, so we're now drilling down for further detail. Once again, we use probing where there's ambiguity or we're not entirely sure, or we want to open up that line of inquiry and dig down a little bit deeper and start to drill down on those particular questions we want to answer, often to get down to a very clean, very clinical answer. All right, another tool we can use is paraphrasing. Okay, now the idea behind a paraphrase is that it's a technique, once again, used to clarify what somebody's saying to us. Okay, so we want to clarify, express thoughts and feelings. We want to confirm as well. So we're clarifying, we're confirming, and also sometimes we're bringing back to the surface. It's often a request for more information. Okay, so when we start to paraphrase, a bit of an idea behind that is, you ask someone, so what's your favourite bit about your last job? Oh, they gave us a lot of autonomy, they gave us a lot of freedom, and I really enjoyed the working conditions. Okay, so autonomy and freedom, and you enjoyed the working conditions. So you're repeating back to them what they had as a reminder. Okay, now that we've established that, and they go, yep, that's what I like, you go, great, now you move into your next question. So each time you're asking the question, you're repeating back to them pretty much what their answer is in a nutshell. Okay, so if they give you a long answer, you take out what you think are the key facts. So you're telling me it was about this, it was about this, it was about that, great. And they'll either say to you, whoa, no, hang on, you've got that wrong, because you might have taken a certain thing away from it. Or they'll go, yes, that's right, you've now confirmed you understood, and that they feel they're actually being listened to. It just avoids any mistakes, and you can drill down, and once again, it starts an open conversation. And when you repeat the facts back to them, it leads them naturally to the next thing they're going to talk about anyway. All right, so probing and paraphrasing are two tools that you can use. Throw it in, think about your open and closed questions, what information you need to elicit. If it's just statement of fact, yes, no, closed questions can be great. If you want to dig down and find out how they tick, that's what you're going to use open questions for. You're going to use your probing technique to drill down on certain facts that you find, and paraphrasing once again as you go through to make sure that you clarified understanding and everyone knows exactly what's going on. All right, so that's about the listening and questioning phase. In a sec, we're going to start talking about, well, what do we do next for the post-interview review.